On this month's University of Arizona Futures in Digital Learning podcast, we bring you a conversation with Megan Kohler, lecturer and learning designer at Penn State, to discuss neurodiversity in the classroom.
You know, if a student's neurodivergent and struggling with planning and task management on all the other things that they have to take care of, and they know that they're not going to receive any compassion from a faculty member, why would they stand up? Why would they speak up? Why would they advocate for themselves? Because they have to and because they should? Well, we can say that, but if we're not going to follow through and extend that same time of compassion for them, then why would we tell them that they need to advocate?
Join us as we discuss strategies for making classes more inclusive for neurodivergent learners and the roles learning design can play in supporting student success. Hello and welcome to this month's Futures in Digital Learning podcast. I am Adam Davi, Instructional Design Manager at the University of Arizona, here with my co-host, Brian. How's it going, Brian?
Hey, Adam, how you doing today?
Good. And we are joined today by Megan Kohler, lecturer and learning designer at Penn State. And we're going to have a fun conversation about neurodiversity today. So Megan, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And Megan and I have worked together through OLC, the Online Learning Consortium. We've been on a few conference committees together. And, you know, planning some shenanigans for those conferences in the past. So it's fun for us to get a chance to reconnect and do something fun like this. So we're excited to have you. Yeah. So first of all, let's, just kind of jump into this topic of neurodiversity and, get your thoughts on, what is neurodiversity? What does it mean to be neurodivergent?
So interestingly enough, those two terms actually are not interchangeable.
Okay.
So I think maybe we could start off with sort of like some sort of terminology.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I'm still, kind of doing the reading and learning myself. So excellent.
Well, and there's a lot to learn. There really is. I think that's one of the things that really amazes me about this is just how big the breadth of knowledge around all of this actually is when I just encountered it a few years ago myself. To answer your question, neurodivergent in and of itself, that term really refers to a person who has a specific condition and that somehow impacts their cognitive abilities. So when we think of the term neurodivergent, you most commonly hear it associated with individuals who have autism, but it also spans to individuals with like ADHD, fetal alcohol syndrome. There's things like acquired brain injuries that also classify as neurodivergent. So really it's any condition that impacts how someone processes information.
Okay.
Then you have neurotypical, and the neurotypical individuals are the ones that would, from a clinical perspective or a medical perspective, would be classified as normal. And there's a lot of debate in terms of what the term normal actually means anyway, but we'll follow along with the medical classifications on that one. And then you have the term neurodiverse, which actually speaks to a group of people that represent sort of the spectrum of cognitive capabilities. So you might have your neurotypical individuals, and classroom is a great example of this. You'd have your neurotypical individuals, but then you might have other individuals who have some type of divergence that's really mild, so mild that they might never even get diagnosed with any type of variation. And then you could have individuals who are very much so on the spectrum, autism spectrum or some other type of neurodivergent spectrum. And so that's really what we mean when we say neurodiverse. So that term neurodiverse, when we think of it in that classroom context, we look at it and we say this is a neurodiverse group of people. Make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So,
and then the last term is neurodiversity. And that we can sort of compare to the concept of biodiversity. Right. So we need those natural variations in the way that human beings think so that we can learn and grow and evolve as a race or as a society.
Right. Okay. All right. That's thank you for clearing that up. That is very helpful. And I think that's, it's interesting because I have seen those terms kind of interchanged in time, in certain things, and people use them, and I didn't fully understand as well. So I appreciate that clarification, and that helps to kind of understand, moving forward, like what are we looking at? Are we looking
Right.
at, neurodiversity in the classroom, or are we looking at helping neurodivergent students, and both, and how is that interchangeable?
Exactly.
Yeah. So so tell me a little bit about what kind of research or what things you are looking into or looking at in terms of neurodiversity.
I actually have a study that's going on right now,
Okay.
which I'm really excited about. And I actually received a grant in order to support the work, which is super exciting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Penn State supported grant. It's part of our Schreier Institute for Teaching Excellence. And what I'm doing along with my research assistant is we are trying to reach out to neurodivergent individuals across various institutions and to get their insights and their feedback on what their experience has been like as a student in higher education. And that's really where we're focusing our efforts, because when students make that transition from being in high school to being in college, it's almost like traveling to an entirely new country.
Yeah.
For them, right? Because now they have lost a lot of the supports that they've received when they were, in K through 12.
Right.
And now they have to navigate the world, oftentimes by themselves.
Right.
And so it can be very intimidating and very scary, quite frankly, for many of them. And so when you take all of that stress that's going on in their world, just trying to navigate, and then now you have all of this academic responsibility that sits on top of that. Well, now we're just compounding the stress and the anxiety that they're feeling, right?
Yeah.
And so this research is really to sort of identify what some of the challenges are that they're encountering. What are those points of stress? And what can we do as learning designers and faculty and staff in order to come alongside and better support these students?
That's awesome. So my first job in higher ed was here at U Arizona. It was working with the SALT Center. And if you're not familiar with the SALT Center, it stands for Strategic Alternative Learning Techniques.
Oh, wow.
And they serve specifically students with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, traumatic brain injury, things like that, who come into college, into higher ed. It's a tuition-based program. So it's an extra cost for students to join, but they get learning specialists, a dedicated learning specialist that they meet with once a week. They get access to tutoring and other things. I think the program has grown a little bit since I've been away from it. But definitely I bring that up because I saw a lot of those challenges, right? Because I was working one-on-one, I was a learning specialist, I was working with those students, working one-on-one with those students who came in, and you're right, they had all kinds of supports and accommodations set up and things, and then they get here and it's like grown exponentially. They have to take care of, life skills on top of academic skills and things of that sort, and it was tough, and so it's definitely something that I think is needed. And we only served a small portion of the population here, obviously the ones who applied to get into our program and are willing to pay the tuition, but that's not the breadth of all students who are dealing with those similar challenges, right? So so I think that's important to recognize that it's these are invisible disabilities, right?
Yes.
A lot of times too. So you can't just look at a student and see like, oh yeah, that person is dyslexic, or that person has ADHD, right? That doesn't, it doesn't happen. So, so just kind of thinking about the fact that you're dealing with this, and they might not want to tell you as an instructor, whatnot. But how can we help? How can we help those students? So, I
Yeah,
think that's great research that you're doing.
thank you. And just to
Yeah.
follow up on something that you had mentioned before about the fact that they are coming here and they're losing a lot of that support.
Mhm.
So a lot of neurodivergent individuals are actually delayed in their cognitive development by approximately 30%.
Yeah.
So when you add that to the mix of sending these young individuals off into the world to go to go to college, I mean, it's very different for them.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I don't really know that people understand that.
Yeah.
I don't think that people really understand how intimidating it is for these young individuals because they're not the same as their peers,
Right.
right?
Right. And I think it's hard enough for maybe a neurotypical student to be able to advocate for themselves in certain situations, right? But
Yeah.
then compile that, with other things going on that you're asking them to now go, talk to your professor, talk to the disability services, talk to campus health. You can do this on your own. And it's like, I've never done it on my own before. How am I supposed to know how?
Yeah.
Um,
And the other really
so,
unfortunate piece that goes along with that is the stigma
mhm.
and the
Yeah,
discrimination that the students
right,
end up experiencing once they
right,
do come out and say, I have ADHD, I
right.
have dyslexia, I have,
Hmm.
whatever type of condition it might be.
Right,
And that's one of the things that I've been reading in the literature is that in many circumstances, students are actually afraid to, you know, um, to disclose this type
hmm,
of neurodivergence
yeah,
um, because they don't want to be discriminated against. All they
right,
want is to be accepted and to be
right,
given the same opportunity to acquire an education as everyone else. And they have that right. They deserve that.
right, right. Yeah, they're wanting to get their education and continue on, and they should be able to do that in ways that are effective for them.
Absolutely.
So,
And I think that that's one of the really interesting things about some of the research that I've been engaging in with these students is, I've been doing one-on-one interviews with some of them in order to just hear their stories for myself.
yeah,
And they start telling me about some of the projects that they're working on, and they are remarkable.
yeah,
I mean, these young individuals, like, even though they're trying to manage everything that's going on with the transition to higher education, then dealing with all of the responsibilities, and on top of that, having to work through their own neurodivergence,
yeah,
they're still going out and advocating for other groups of students. They're going out and they're doing volunteer work. They're doing all of these other things. And it's just remarkable at the
yeah,
capability that these individuals have and the intellect. And I think that
yeah,
that is something that is so unfortunate is that, we were talking about stigmas. It's like if you disclose the fact that you're different from the
right,
norm in some way, the assumption is that you're lesser than. And we
yeah,
don't factor in that different could actually mean advanced.
right,
Different is just different,
hmm,
right? And different
yeah,
is good.
yeah,
Different can be amazing.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
I
Sorry, you
mean,
can.
if no, like if it exactly, like if you're in a room with everybody who thinks the same way that you do and has the same ideas that you do, like, where are you going to go with that? Like,
Yeah,
how is that going to ever expand or get better, right? But if you're in a room with people who think differently and have different ideas of how to accomplish a goal and how to do things, like the innovation, grows. And that's, kind of what I hear you saying is that, like, they're different. They have these different ideas. They have the capability. There's just, maybe they have to go a different route to do
yeah.
that. And I realize I'm making hand gestures and this is a podcast and nobody's going to see that, but, um, you know, but you get my drift there. It's and that's the fun part, right? Is how do you help them navigate that alternate route?
Mhm.
And
When I was growing up, I am fortunate that Mr. Rogers was on air, and he
Oh,
would end
nice.
every
yeah,
show by saying, "You are special. There's no one in the world just like you." And he would celebrate the special
yeah,
individuality of each of his viewers. And I think at some point we moved away from celebrating that and kind of homogenizing everything, making
Yeah.
everybody sort of this gray blob. And here's the information we're going to give you in the class. And it's up to you to figure out how the best way for you to learn that information. We do a lot of reading and writing
Mhm.
college courses, but when I started instructional design, I think we had 4 different types of learners. We had visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and then reading and writing. And now we have so many more different types of learners. We have learners who are exceptionally gifted when you introduce them to music, but they may be terrible at math. It's okay. We
Yeah.
have to
yeah,
celebrate that. And when you see that one of your students is really blossoming and coming alive with a certain assignment, maybe as an instructor, you kind of put that in the back of your mind and think, okay, I know the next assignment I've given this class is a writing assignment. This student may not do that well on the writing assignment. So how can I create some equity in my class so that I give them the same opportunity to show me that they're learning that I'm giving the other students in the classroom. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I love that.
and go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, I love the fact that you're thinking like that, because that's exactly one of the strategies that I recommend when I give my workshop on neurodivergent learners. It's give students choice, right? So we know that quizzes and exams are not an effective way of assessing any type of knowledge retention, right? And that's all it is. It's knowledge recall. It's not actual processing of learning of information. And the other thing is that because of sort of this efficiency model of education where we have to have students, we give them 20 minutes to take the exam and that's it.
yeah,
Because we don't want them to copy the information and we don't want to share it with other students. And we don't want them to cheat, right? But when you take that 20-minute time limit, you're now imposing an additional stressor on a neurodivergent learner. So are they really going to be able to perform that well on that timed exam when all they can think about is that clock and how it's ticking down and how they're losing time? It's going to make it even more stressful for them. And so one
And
of the
there's
strategies,
and there's someone in another country watching them through their webcam.
oh gosh,
yeah.
yeah,
That's
Yeah.
we
that's a
won't go
whole
down
other
that
stressor.
pathway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always recommend is give students the choice. So a very simple one is if you're going to have timed quizzes, that's fine, but then also give an opportunity for students who maybe want to write an essay as part of their or as their exam to do that instead.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's going to be better for a neurodivergent learner because they need time to process and think through the information. And quite frankly, I know that that helps a lot of different people.
Well, and that's kind of one of the questions I posed is, how do these strategies kind of relate to universal design for learning? And is there overlap? Is there a connection? Does that make you cringe? Does it,
So yeah, great question.
yeah.
Universal design for learning offers a lot of great options for students and for professors as they're trying to support learners. But UDL is primarily about increasing access to informational materials.
Okay.
It's not a learning framework. It's not a teaching framework. The entire purpose of UDL is to reduce barriers, to make it easier for students to consume the information, but that's really where it stops.
Okay.
And so we actually need a whole different set of strategies to bring alongside of UDL in order to actually facilitate and support learning.
And that's great. So yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it's, that the difference, and I think this is another case of terminology that I see getting confused a lot when I have kind of conversations with people, is the difference between accessibility and inclusion, right? And access is one thing, right? Providing access, giving, like you said, access to content, things like that. And then inclusion is something different, right? And that means different things for a lot of different populations of students. Inclusion for our BIPOC students is going to look different than inclusion for our neurodivergent students. And so, what are some other strategies? Student choice. I've been, shouting student choice for years, before it was even popular to shout student choice. But what are some other things? What are some other strategies that we can employ as learning designers and instructional designers and technologists and things like that?
Sure. And I totally believe it that you were championing that. Yeah. You're awesome, Adam.
Thanks, Megan.
So yeah, I mean, in addition to sort of leaning away from like the timed quizzes and exams and giving students more choice and more autonomy, actually want really quickly to touch upon that. So one of the assessment strategies that I actually love implementing is the unessay. Are you familiar with that?
No, but I'm curious.
So the unessay assignment is where you allow students to create some type of artifact and then write like a really brief one-page description of how that artifact relates to what they're learning in the classroom. Okay. So you're teaching a course on whatever subject, right? But then you have this student, let's say his name is John, right? And John really loves to build models. And that's something that he likes to spend all his time doing. Maybe he does a lot with Legos. He just loves getting in there with his hands and really just crafting things. Yeah. So an activity like the unessay assignment is going to be perfect for him, because now he can sit down and he can create some type of artifact with whatever materials he wants, but he can create that model and then explain his thought process of how this represents to that concept that they're learning about in the classroom. And he can share that back with his faculty member. And it hits on, some of the other different elements that we talk about in higher education, the relationships, rigor, relevance, and reflection. Yeah. Right. So all of a sudden you're hitting on the relationship component, because now the student is sharing a part of themselves back with the faculty member. And that is an amazing opportunity for the faculty member to be like, John, your model building is amazing. You are so talented with this. Keep doing this. Right. Can you imagine what that does for a student? Yeah. Like, to open themselves up and to be a little bit vulnerable and to get such amazing feedback, like it's fantastic. So the rigor is there because they're going to challenge themselves. They're going to want to create something amazing that they can share back. They're not just going to put something together with minimal effort and turn it in, because this is something that they're proud of, right? So relationships, rigor, relevance. There you go, relevance. They're tying it back to the course concepts, and reflection. They need to be able to reflect on and synthesize this information in order to be able to write the paper. So I'm a huge advocate of that assignment. And then
I love the way that sounds. Because that is what I want from my instructors when I take a class. Give me an opportunity for me to shine, show you.
Yes.
Let me take all the stuff you've given me and let me show you what I think you're wanting from me. And then you can grade it and say, everything was great, except your pictures were fuzzy. I didn't understand them. I didn't understand page 34, whatever. And then that helps me grow so that the next time I do a similar assignment, I can go, oh, wait, my teacher said I've got to look at this, this, and this. And okay, let me focus on that a little bit more and maybe knock it out of the park with this next assignment. I love teachers that do that. Because just the passion, it comes through, when they give their feedback to the student. Now, though, I need to be the most hated person on the podcast and say,
Oh no.
I have 80 students in my classroom. I don't have time to grade 80 completely different assignments and try and figure out what all these 80 different students are trying to tell me with their different submissions.
So I
How do you
think it's
respond to somebody like that?
I, I think it's not that challenging. And here's why. Because if you explain to the students, create a rubric, right? Pull in that
Yeah.
amazing tool that we have at our disposal.
Yeah.
Create a rubric for what it is that you want to see in that paper. So you don't necessarily have to grade the artifact. What you're grading is the paper that they have written. And you can make, you can give a portion of the rubric over to evaluating the artifact if you want to. I mean, you can have things like, sorry, I was actually just working on a rubric for the unessay assignment the other day, and now I'm trying to remember what it was that I included in that, and I'm drawing a blank.
But you're grading, I understand what you're saying, like you're not grading the specifics of like what they're doing, or you're not evaluating like the specifics of what they're doing per se. You're evaluating their understanding of the concepts, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you can also give them kudos for the work that they've done, right? So like this is aesthetically beautiful, right? So I think that was one of the ones that I had included on there, right? So it looks polished, it looks professional, it's presented well, right? So there are things that you can evaluate with that work in order for the students to really feel like they're gaining something from that work as well. Because if you just dismiss the artifact and just focus on the paper, then they're going to be like, well, I put all the effort into this and you didn't even say anything about it. That's going to be discouraging. So there needs to be a balance.
I think you could also like add in a piece, like a reflective piece of like, what was your thought process of just creating this artifact? Like, how did you go about doing that? What was your step by step and or whatnot? How did this come together?
Absolutely.
And and that gives them a little bit more of that, the relationship building too, right? Where they get to share their process of creating the artifact. And not necessarily like you have the how does it tie into the content, but then if this is a passion piece of theirs, like they get to kind of share that passion a little bit without necessarily having to directly connect that to the content as well. But it's still cool. I had a student in a course I taught in the fall, and for our final project, she did this really cool video project. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, how did you do this? Like, and I emailed her afterwards. I was like, how did you do this? Like, this is really cool. I want to share this and I want to know how you did it. And she was like, so happy that, I thought it was cool. And she like showed me, and it was like a painstaking process. She said it actually took a lot longer than I expected it to do. And but she's like, but I'm proud of it. And I'm like, you should be. So so I think that can add that extra little bit of pride and ownership in their work too.
Absolutely. And that really ties into the feedback that we give to them. And that's another thing that I recommend to people is, be aware of the language that you use. We've sort of fallen into this really bad habit of using words like poor in a rubric, right? So if I tell you that your work is poor, how does that make you feel?
Right.
Exactly. But if you swap out the poor and instead use a term like novice, what does that make you feel? Makes you feel like there's somewhere to go. Makes you feel like there's an opportunity to improve. Whereas if we use words that are negative like poor, that's very much so a label with a very negative connotation. But novice means that you're just starting.
that's,
And our words can have profound impact on the
yeah,
people around us. And so especially as educators, we really need to, I feel like we need to really pay attention to the words that we're using, especially in a grading context, because you have the power to raise someone up, or you have the power to completely tear them down with your grading.
yeah,
And we need to raise people up.
right.
You know, it's not always about having that nice, neat little yes or no. Did this person meet this assignment criteria, or no, they didn't? It's sometimes about the effort.
Right.
It's sometimes about the process that they went through to get to that point. So I used to be an actor before I got into the field of higher education. And I remember working on a project as an instructional designer, and there was this thing that we had created with another artist. And if that isn't confusing, I don't know what's going to confuse you.
We're following. Gotcha.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And so my supervisor, I remember he turned to me and he's just like, so wait, they don't want to use this again? He's like, then why did they go through all of the effort to create it? And I said, because they're artists. It's about the process.
Yeah.
It's about what they've discovered. It's about the journey. It's about what they've learned along the way. The output is a very small piece of this, but what they experienced throughout this entire journey, that's what's valuable to them. And I just wish that we could see more of that sort of thought process involved in higher education, as opposed to just focusing on the grades. You know, where did this student start? And how do we get them from that point to the point where we hope we can get them at the end of this process? Right. And I feel like if we had more of that type of a mindset and less of a, here's your first quiz, here's your second quiz, here's your third quiz, here's your fourth quiz. And granted, not all faculty approach it like that.
Right.
But if we had that mindset of growth as opposed to meeting the check marks, our educational system would completely change. It would be so different.
I agree. Yes. And if only, we were in charge, right? We could, we could make this happen.
I was on a soapbox there for a minute.
Yeah. No, but it's, you got me thinking, about this, because I've always thought that too. Like it's, that process, right? Where did they start compared to where did they finish? And, if they start and they take a quiz or exam or essay or whatever, and let's say they fail that first one, right? And then they get to the end and they have, they've improved to where they can get, whatever's deemed a C in that course, right? They've improved those 2-letter grades as defined by standardized grading that we've accepted, in our higher education or educational system. How is that different from improving from like a C to an A by the end of the year? And what does that improvement look like, right? Imagine, think about those gains that student has taken throughout the course of the class, and how can we better evaluate those gains to show that improvement and to show that they are mastering the concepts, right? And instead of just assigning a letter,
right?
And I know we're not going to get rid of letter grades overnight.
That's the metric that we have, right? And so it's the metric that we'll use.
Exactly. But how can we better assign those grades and evaluate them based on performance in the classroom? And
and if we can implement strategies where students have the ability to bring their strengths to the evaluation process, like we were talking about with the essay, I mean, especially for neurodivergent individuals, I mean, can you imagine the impact that would have on those students? And not only that, but if we would allow them that, or provide them with that opportunity, I mean, why would any student ever be struggling in the course? you
Right.
know, and
What about allowing students to help each other? And instead of putting all the grading on the instructor, allow students throughout the class to give feedback on a project and give them a, maybe I'm going to say rubric, but just a broad set of guidelines. When you're reviewing other students' work, think about these things, use this language when you're suggesting edits, improvements, comments like that. Because I think that creates empathy with other people, because you're not just
Mhm.
trying to, in air quotes, show off to the professor. Um, you're you're helping your peers learn in
Yes.
maybe different
Mhm.
ways, and you're evaluating. Not only are you helping somebody else learn, you're learning from their work when you get to evaluate it and view it,
Mhm.
and you can see, um, you know, maybe you do fall into one of a certain neurodivergent category.
Mhm.
Um, and by viewing somebody else's work, you get a broader perspective on the assignment if it can be pointed out to you. If you can identify this person did this section of the assignment a certain way to achieve this certain goal. Is it important? Is it beneficial? Um, does it do more harm than good to allow students to critique others' work? What do you think?
I think that having sort of that peer learning process, or that more sort of social learning, is absolutely a great strategy to implement. And I think, especially if we could have sort of like that um, peer that individuals who are neurodivergent can turn to throughout a semester to sort of help keep them on task, that would be incredibly beneficial, right? Because when we talk about neurodiversity, it's something that impacts our executive functions. And one of the executive functions that's impacted is planning and time management, right?
Yeah.
So now you're not only talking about supporting them from a learning perspective, which was what you were talking about, but now they also have that person that they can turn to help keep them on task, so that assignments don't slip through the cracks, so that they have enough time to work on that project, or to build that model, or to pursue whatever it is that needs to be worked on, conduct that literature review for the research article that you have to write. They have somebody who can help them develop that skill. And, that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't really realize about neurodiversity, is that just because a student or an individual doesn't have a certain skill, like planning or time management, it doesn't mean that they can't acquire it. It just means that
Right.
that is not a skill that has developed at the same rate as their peers.
Yeah.
And it's until students hit the age of, I think it's around, close to 30 years of age, when it becomes much more difficult for them to acquire those new skills. But up until that age, so you figure undergraduates, definitely grad
Yeah.
students, and then even PhD students, they
Yeah.
still have opportunities to develop those skills. And so, I mean, granted, I'm thinking a little bit more traditionally, but there are definitely still students, who are non-traditional, who still fit within that time frame, that can come back and engage in that. But I think if we can, as educators, build in the opportunities to help students develop those skills, that's even more meaningful for them from a teaching and learning perspective, right? And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to kind of touch on that, and thinking about, because you brought up, non-traditional students, and, we design for our online programs here, our fully online programs here, our students are non-traditional students for the most part. And, thinking about that idea of kind of time management and deadlines and due dates and planning and things like that, that's something that I have conversations with faculty when we design. But what are some things that we can do, like in an online context, when maybe there's not that necessarily direct connection with other students that they can have that support? What are some things that faculty can build in to kind of help students with that time management aspect of a course, especially in, we designed 7.5 week courses, which have their own drawbacks, and I won't get on that soapbox right now, but thinking about that accelerated pace of a course, where if you fall behind in a week, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
So what are some things that we can do in that type of setting?
Yeah, so I think one of the most powerful things that I have seen, and it can feel sort of awkward, because in an online course, there sort of is that set structure and that set pace. But one of the things that you can ask, or have your faculty ask the students, is to have them sit down and develop a schedule for themselves. So here's how my week is planning out. I've got work from 9 to 5. I'm taking this class online in the evenings. Sally's got, swim practice or after school or whatever activity she's doing. And then Jimmy's got this going on. And so I need to take care of them. And my husband's going to be traveling this week. So have them sit down and look at that schedule and then say, okay, I am consistently going to dedicate Tuesday evenings for 2 hours, because that's a regular block of time where I don't have anything else going on.
Yeah.
And if my husband's not around, I'm going to find a babysitter. I'm going to call my mom, my dad, aunt, uncle, whoever. That is my dedicated time to work on my course and my activities. Because as a person who has ADHD, and as a person who has 2 young children, and as a person who has a husband who travels a lot, I can verify that it is incredibly difficult sometimes to stay on top of those things if you don't have that time blocked off, and if you don't have that plan. And so if they can sit down and identify that and take it back to the instructor and be like, this is what's going on in my life. This is my dedicated time. And then if something happens and the student doesn't follow through on their work, the faculty member can go back to that and be like, I wonder what was happening.
Right.
And when they can see the complexity of that student's life, whether the student reaches out to them or they reach out to the student, but to have that dialogue about, so I noticed this week the assignment didn't get done. And if the student comes back and says, my husband was traveling and I couldn't find anybody to watch the kids, I'm really, really sorry. The faculty member can be like, no worries, I get it. I'm going to give you an extension. I'm going to give you to the weekend, right? And I think that having that visibility of what's going on in the student's life is very different from the faculty member sort of not having that window in, and instead putting all of the onus on the student to communicate those things. And, if a neurodivergent student doesn't feel comfortable communicating certain things in the first place, they might have a fear of communicating that they're not going to meet a deadline or something. So the more flexibility and the more openness we can offer for students is going to be incredibly impactful.
One of the things I recommend to my faculty is we have the ability to leave a little video note on an announcement page. So it's like the first thing students see when they come into the course. Hi, I'm Professor so-and-so, we're going to be learning about this. But then every week I have them post an announcement, and I say to them, it doesn't have to be Hollywood production. It can be you on a sofa with a cat on your lap and a cup of coffee. It needs to be you being a human.
Yeah.
So that your students can see that you are a human, you're not a robot, you have a life, they have a life. This instructor, they may not have graded my essay when they were going to. Maybe they had to take the cat to the vet, something came up. And then, there's that give and take between the instructor and the student, which makes learning, I think, easier because students aren't afraid of the instructor. I remember being afraid of my instructors until I was like, wait a second. Why? If I have a question, just go and ask them. What are they going to do?
I kind of touching on that, one of the things that I started doing and started suggesting to faculty and starting doing myself as an instructor is thinking about, okay, when do I have time to grade the students' work? And so if I'm asking the students to turn something in Friday at midnight, I'm not grading it Saturday morning at 1 a.m. So why do I have that deadline? Why
Yeah,
can I make that deadline Monday at noon? Because
right.
I'm not going to grade it until Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
And then that gives them a little extra time, right? And that's, more transparent. And I'm transparent with my students about that too. And say, look, this is when I'm planning to grade your assignment. So this is your deadline. Like, if it's, if I have to be inconsistent sometimes, like if I have to change it, so maybe 1 week, I'm not grading it Monday afternoon, I'll tell them, hey, I'm not going to get to this until Wednesday. So really, I'll give you guys a couple extra days. You have it if you want it, because I'm not going to get to it until then. We won't mark it late, right? And I think
Yeah.
that helps with some of their anxiety too sometimes, right? Because like you said, Megan, sometimes things come up, right? And what Brian said, sometimes it's hard to advocate for yourself and go to the instructor and be like, hey, I couldn't get it done in time. Like what? So if as an instructor, you can kind of build in that flexibility, show that you're human, right? Show that you are, have other things as well. I think it helps students to relax a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah.
And so, we were talking about communicating with with the faculty. And I remember when I was in college, granted, this was a while ago, we won't say how many years, but when I was a student in college, I remember I worked full time as an actor. I worked for a touring company. And so I would plan all of my classes on I would plan all my classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays so that I could be driving and traveling to my shows on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And there would be times when I would have a car that broke down or I would get a flat tire.
Yeah.
And I ended up sitting on the side of the road for however many hours until a tow truck came, or I would end up sitting in a random garage somewhere until they could find a part for the car. And so, there was no way for me to be,
right.
I mean, this was, before we had the same types of communications that we have now. And I'll just stop right there.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the same capability of communicating, right? And not only that, but in all honesty, I was afraid to communicate things like that because I already felt like I was struggling. And then on top of that, I was going to miss something. And if I had to tell somebody that I was going to miss something, it made me feel like I was a failure. And so there would be times when I'd be like, you know what? They're just going to think I'm a failure anyway. So I'm just not going to say anything. I'm just going to take the F for the quiz. Whatever. I'll move forward. I'll study harder. I'll work harder for the next one.
Right.
So there very much so is a sense of fear that I don't really think that we always recognize that students don't want to communicate sometimes when they're struggling or when they're having challenges.
Yeah.
And the response is, you didn't meet the deadline. I'm sorry. Right. And so where are we showing students compassion within that? If a student's neurodivergent and struggling with planning and task management on all the other things that they have to take care of, and they know that they're not going to receive any compassion from a faculty member, why would they stand up?
Right.
Why would they speak up? Why would they advocate for themselves? Because they have to and because they should?
Yeah.
Well, we can say that, but if we're not going to follow through and extend that same time of compassion for them, then why would we tell them that they need to advocate?
Right. Yeah. That's good.
Another soapbox. Sorry.
Yeah.
I've got lots of those.
I'm like, I don't even know where to go from there. Like, that's right. It's compassion. It's, I think one of the things that I think more than anything that the pandemic has kind of shown us in the world of education is that we are all human,
Mhm.
and we deal with, our human lives in different ways. And students are not just students. That is not their only identity.
Yes.
And faculty are not just faculty. Like that's
Mhm.
not their only identity either,
Yeah.
right? And so it's okay for faculty to open up and say, hey, I've got two young kids that I have to take care of as well. And the student who may not have known that about the faculty before can maybe feel more comfortable saying, like, I also have a young child at home that I have to take care of. So you
Yes.
understand what I'm going through. Like that will, make me more likely to open up to you, uh, and
Agreed.
share what's going on. And so that ability, I think that back and forth, um, it's a small thing, right? And it's not something necessarily that's like learning design focused per se, but it's how do you build that humanity into your course, and give
Yeah.
space for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's a really critical thing for what we
Yeah.
do.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, and it's not just for the student to the faculty, it's the student to the
To this,
student as
mhm,
well.
yeah.
And if we think about neurodivergent learners, I mean, I can speak from her firsthand experience as well as some of the one-on-one interviews I've been recording with the students that I'm interviewing for the research study. You just always feel different. You
Yeah.
always feel like you can't quite fit in and like you can't quite connect in
Mhm.
the same way that everybody else does. And so if we find ways, opportunities for students to share enough about themselves to
Mhm.
connect with one another, but yet not feel like they have to,
Right.
share like their life history with us,
Right. Right.
um, that is incredibly impactful.
Mhm.
And there's a story that I always love to share. It's if I can, I'll find the link and send it to you all, and maybe you can put
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
in the show notes.
Mhm.
But it's the story of this young woman who was autistic, and she was participating in this course. And at the beginning of the course, she was being socially rejected by the other students in the class.
Mhm.
And then there was this activity that the instructor led within the course. And then after that activity, well, as part of that activity, the young woman shared some of her experiences being bullied in high school. And the other students in the classroom picked up on that, right? And they were just like,
Yeah.
oh, I've been bullied too. And so after that dialogue occurred in the class, all of a sudden the instructor said that they started to notice that other students started specifically to reach out to that autistic woman in the
Mm.
course. They were intentionally trying to include her and to make
Yeah.
her feel like she was welcome and that she was a part of the course and that she belonged, right? And I
Yeah.
love that story.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on a keynote speech for neurodiversity, and that's something that I'm working into there. And because I love that story so much. Every time I tell it, I just get the warm fuzzies, right?
Yeah.
But those human connections that we
Yeah.
have with one another, that can completely transform the
Yeah.
type of educational experience that we can have. Because when all of a sudden you're not fearful of being judged, there's this release
Yeah.
that comes with it. There's this openness there. It's like so much of the tension and the stress and the anxiety just melts away. And
Yeah.
we need to be able to do that so that the students can focus on learning instead of worrying about whether or not they're going to be accepted or
Right.
rejected or stigmatized or
Right.
any of the other negative things that go along with this. So I hope I hope
Yeah.
that helps the
No,
conversation.
I think that's wonderful. And I think that if for us as designers, learning designers, instructional designers, whatever other kind of designers are out there, if you can approach what you're doing with that kind of humanity in mind, right? And like, how do you build that connection? And I know it's, that there's all kinds of debate going back and forth about how that looks in online classes and asynchronous environments and whatnot, but it can happen.
Yes.
You have to provide students the opportunity, I think, is the biggest key. And what I hear you saying as well is, if you provide that opportunity in what you're asking of students, then kind of those floodgates will open.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So excellent. Well, thank you very much for this insightful conversation, Megan. I really enjoyed it. And I hope our listeners do as well. I'm pretty sure they will.
Good. I hope so too. This was a fantastic conversation. I had so much fun talking with you both.
Yeah, us too. Yeah, this is great. So
good.
We'll have to have you back on in the future and talk about some more fun topics. Get on those soapboxes a little bit more. Right.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And for those of you listening, we'll have another fun and exciting episode next month as well. So thank you again for listening.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website, ucatt.arizona.edu.